Hey, good morning, guys. This one's going to be another members one, right? So, look, I've been going through the tabs. I know I said I'd make a video yesterday, didn't really get the time to go through that. Um, so this one's going to be that video, right? Now, look, in terms of the tabs, right, some of the questions obviously you guys have, it seems to be very comparable in terms of, what you're asking, right? So this question, you're, going from a 4 hour to, a 15 minute and so on. I've come into the technical questions, talked about the same thing, these fractals, two to the left, two to the right. Um, this is obviously something that seems to be mind-boggling, for some of you guys to kind of comprehend, why this and why that. I've talked about, obviously, let me go through the different channels. So again, back testing different time frames. One of the conversations I had with one of the members in direct messages was to do with taking too small of a time frame trades and not understanding the bigger picture, overall. Now, one of the issues with that and one of the fixes was ultimately using the bigger time frames for an entry and don't even think of entering a smaller time frame until a bigger trade is already underway, right? So I'll cover that in a second. What else was there? There was commodities. Yeah, this one here again, similar kind of question. Um, sometimes the charts can be a bit busy, a bit crowded in terms of the bigger picture, right? So what I want to do is just really kind of fly through some of these things in terms of one, how they fit together, and two, how to manage that. Um, there was another question I think I just seen, which was I think it was this morning, maybe my trades. Yeah, this one right at the bottom. So again, still back testing, etc., etc. And I guess that looking at these higher time frames do help, but obviously zooming into these smaller ones. So I think again, a similar kind of issue. So look, a couple of things for me, right? Now, what I've been doing in the last couple of days, I've been playing around with kind of refining what I've actually been doing, right? My biggest problem in the last couple of weeks, really, I've almost been taking profits too early, right? And that kind of seems mad that that's my biggest challenge at the moment, is just kind of knowing almost where to get in, where to get out, making a decent profit out of it, but not running the trades long enough to potentially take further, right? So this could be moving stop losses, all that kind of thing. But again, these are the types of things that your back testing is going to help you with. Your forward testing is definitely going to help you with, and ultimately understanding what it is you're looking for, right? So what I'm going to try to do in this video is to rush it through quite quick, which is why I'm trying to go a little bit faster, and really just kind of tick all the boxes that I've just covered, right? So in terms of multi-time frames, right, now one of the things that I've just been looking at myself is refining these kind of draws on liquidity, right, but using the fractal move rather than the two to the right, two to the left, right? So in theory, start off with a monthly time frame. And the general idea, right, is that the way the markets are moving, the markets are always going to seek liquidity, right? So you've got internal to external, and then you're going to have ultimately external to internal. However, on that premise, you can also see an external to internal, and then internal to internal, and internal to internal before you then achieve another external type play, right? Now, this sounds really complicated, but relatively it's not, right? The general idea is that when the market moves in these types of waves, right, this is a your Elliott wave type cycle, what you're going to see inside of these moves, you're going to have an internal move from external. You're going to have internal, 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 external, right? Now, at this particular point, this has only created one fractal move of the move up, right? So this five wave has only created, in theory, the 0 to 1 of that larger scale, right? So same concepts apply, same rules apply, nothing else changes, right? This is just me trying to explain this now in a slightly different way, right? Now, if we look at where the market's likely to go and why the market's likely to go, right? What I'm looking for straight away, and it's on a monthly time frame, right, is that we've cleared these two highs, which means we've tagged liquidity in and around here, right? This also means that this level right now is technically external range liquidity, right? We have the base of the range, and I've talked about this from the mechanical side, and we have the high of the range, right? So my range is here. So what I'm looking for in theory is liquidity inside of these areas, right? These could be obviously fair value gaps, right? These could be auction areas, consolidations on smaller time frames, right? And these are the things that you're kind of zooming for. So right now, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, right, bigger time frame. And this is kind of answering now the next part of the question, right? Now, if I was to look at this and say, what am I expecting? Well, we're clearly in this kind of upwards move. We've just broken the structure high, right, from there across. After a structure break, right, so let's assume that this is here, right? We break through that structure, right, and we create the high. Well, we're clearly going to want a pullback and a pullback back into the range, and the range be in this range. So you can start to see how these things are trying to fit together, right? So with that being said, if I understand where my range is, from a mechanical point of view, there's nothing stopping me putting on, right, my base of the range, right? So my bottom of the range in terms of the overall move there. And therefore, I'm going to have this here as my low. Right? Now, all of a sudden, I'm going to use this as the high that clearly just broken. Or was just broken there, so let me put this in as a dashed line instead. And I'm going to use this for now as the top part of my range. Right? I'm going to put that back as a solid line. So I clearly have some information on this higher time frame. But would I buy or sell you? Well, nothing, right? Because at this point, all I'm trying to do is to obtain a bias. So the next thing that I'm working on is this fractal tool, right? Now, this fractal tool is painting the closest fractal levels, right? So this is ultimately the green line creating the high, the red line, which is identified by this little dot as well, and the prior fractal identified by the same dot, right? So this is almost automatic. Now, when it comes to these internal ranges, right, as I said about the difference in terms of what's going on, what am I looking for? We clearly have two gaps in the price on this monthly time frame, right? Now, I'm interested in the closest one, especially on this time frame, and this is where your bias is going to come in. This is where your own personal preferences are going to come in. Right? And the reason I say that is that what you might be looking for is completely different to what I'm looking for. My account size might be completely different to your account size, and therefore we're looking for different types of trades on different time frames, different structures for different results. So I'm just going to mark this up as a monthly gap, right? Now, I probably could mark the lower one as well, but I'm just not going to bother. Right? So what I now have is my fractal high, my fractal low. So the next part of the question is why 2 to the left and 2 to the right? Well, if you imagine on this and being, the best example, really. If you imagine I have to wait 2 to the left, 2 to the right to confirm this being a high, I'm going to have all of May and all of June, right, before I can say, yeah, that was my high. Oh, I wanted a short, but I've missed the short because I've waited 2 to the left and 2 to the right. Okay, because I'm looking at the bias for the smaller time frame type swings. So all I'm doing is I'm just assuming, unless this high gets taken now, my current high point is this previous point here, right? This was April's high. So that's good enough for me, especially on this type of time frame, to utilize a fractal high rather than a 2 to the left and 2 to the right type high, right? Again, this is personal preference. This is something that, I will always use 2 to the left and 2 to the right when it comes to, core strategies, core moves, 200 pips, 500 pips, 1,000 pips in terms of a move. When I'm looking for 20 pips, 15 pips, the fractal moves are going to get you into these trades a little bit earlier. They're going to be a little bit more high risk. That's, the general nature of this. But ultimately, you're going to get more opportunities, I guess, kind of faster. And that's the only main difference, right? So, there's the answer to the next question. So, coming back to the same question in terms of how to manage this and what to do in terms of managing this, right? One of the things that I do is I'm going to put these trend lines and rectangles tools, right? I'm going to put this into a monthly group. Right, so I've created a group of drawings, and I'm going to call this something like, just for you guys, I'm going to put this as, say, a stream monthly. Right, now at this particular point, one of the other things that I can do is I'm going to look at these and I'm going to say, well, I'm not really that interested on a monthly time frame, right? Because all I'm looking for is an up or down type bias, right? So I'm going to make this a little bit clearer, a bit more transparent. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on the outer lines. Make this so it's kind of barely there. I'm going to probably do the same thing with the text, if I'm honest. Right, let's put them there like this. And these are the types of things that you guys can do and get used to doing, right? I'm going to do exactly the same thing on these trend lines. So it's a bit laggy. Whenever I put OBS on, it seems to be a little bit more laggy overall. So what I want to do is, again, similar thing in terms of the lines. I'm just going to make these a little bit more transparent, a little bit easier for me to, understand, what they are, where they are. And, that might be a little bit too dark for some of you, right? But that line clearly is there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just leave that on for now, right? Now what I want to do is I want to drop down to this. Oh, just turned it off. I'm going to drop down to the weekly time frame, right? So here's the weekly time frame. Now, as you can see, right, that's relatively transparent, right? I can make it more transparent again, right? You can obviously get the next one. I'll show you what else you can do, right? Now, what I'm doing on the weekly time frame is I'm doing exactly the same thing, right? So I've marked up my high and my low in terms of where we are from a monthly range. What I'm trying to do now is to understand where the price could potentially want to pull back to. So we know we have a monthly gap here, right? We've also got a weekly gap overlapping that gap. So let me put another box in and replicate the box again, if it'll let me. Right, now put the magnet tool on, make sure my levels are perfect. I'm going to drag this across and I'm going to put this as a weekly gap. Right. So that's another potential area of interest, right? It doesn't mean I'm trading anything. It doesn't mean I'm just looking at where these things are. This is why I'm working on this indicator at the moment, right? We clearly have another deeper level, right? And I'm kind of interested in that deeper level. And we also have this last red candle there, right? Which will be consolidation. So, there's nothing stopping us going deeper, 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 right? However, what I'm now looking for in terms of understanding this bias is we've got the monthly up, right? But we're in a weekly technical pullback, right? Now, as you can see, we haven't really started to pull back yet, right? Because at this stage, we haven't had a change of character. So in theory, we're still technically up on both of these time frames, right? So what I've done now is I've identified a couple of key areas that are interesting to me, right, on this higher time frame. Obviously, there's going to be other ones, right? This one down here is going to be a big consolidation. There's a gap there. There's this one here is a consolidation. I'm still on a weekly time frame. All I want to do is I want to see why and where I'm looking at on these smaller time frames, right? So what I can do now is I can look at this and say, well, okay, I've got this one here, right? I've now got a weekly move there, right? And this weekly move, I'll make this one a little bit brighter because it's a bit closer, right? So I'm going to put that a little bit brighter. I might even put some text on that just to highlight. Yeah, let's put some text on there, right? So this is the weekly strong low. Okay. Now again, I can make that a little bit more transparent once OBS stops lagging. Right. Make that a little bit more transparent so it's again kind of less intrusive in terms of looking, right? And at that point, I don't really need to mark up my high because I got that there, right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to create the same kind of folder, right? So again, similar thing, just copy the two things, CTRL and click them. Come in here and I'm going to put the stream weekly, right? So I've saved these two now as two things, right? As two separate groups. Now what I can do, let me just turn the indicator off a second so you can see it's clearer. What I can now do is I can either swap between the two and say, right, I want to turn that off, right? And I just want to see what I'm looking at from a weekly. I want to turn this off, and I want to see what I'm looking at from a monthly. Right? And I'm flicking between the two, right? Clear as day. Now I'm going to drop down to the daily time frame. I'm doing exactly the same thing, right? Now, this is where obviously the next question comes in, and the bit that I think a lot of people are struggling with is how do you keep up with, where you are right now? Notepad and pen is a great idea, right? In terms of knowing where you are for, daily, weekly, monthly, right? And then dropping down. But you do the same thing with a 4 hour, 1 hour, 15, 5 and 1 if that's what you're looking for. So before I stick the indicator on now, right, what I'm looking for is my bias ultimately is down, right? Because I see a pullback is needed, if nothing else. We've had external liquidity, which means we're probably looking for internal liquidity, and the internal liquidity is, well, potentially where I've marked it up, right? So let's stick these two back on. This is the beauty of using the tool like this, right? Is now I have a pretty good understanding in terms of what the price is probably trying to pull for. Now I can see again clear as day we've got a gap there, right? Another gap there. But I'm just going to I want to use almost the closest ones, right? In terms of understanding what's going on. Well, for me, this gap in there has already been taken, already been used, right? So the more valuable gap is likely this one. All right, so I can put that on there, come across, drag this out. I'm going to come in and I'm going to say we now have a daily gap. Right? Now, as you can see from clustering techniques, right? And this is something if you're new to us and you've only just joined, you haven't watched all the videos yet. One of the videos, I think, in the either advanced methodologies, examples, or something like that in terms of the videos. This obviously is a technique where if you can overlap a couple of things, you can put Fibonacci levels in, fair value gaps, put things like auction areas, and technically the more that you can technically overlap there, the more likely that level of pull is going to be, right? Now, let me just look to see if there's anything obvious from a volume point. So I'm going to go swing high, swing low to swing high, right? And, technical area is this daily gap range, right? Well, we clearly have a gap, a gap, a gap. So the next real area of interest is if we start falling through this, we are very likely to potentially invert, right? Because the biggest volume cluster is way down here, right? Now, that biggest volume cluster being down there, let's change that to a different color, right? That's, again, another area of interest, but I'm not really bothered right now. I just want to understand what I'm seeing, right? Why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. So right now I've got this volume cluster, right? There was a couple of gaps on the weekly time frame lower down, as I mentioned, a couple of gaps on the monthly time frame, I think even lower down, right? But the general idea is that, look, we want to see at least a pull to something like this. So our bias in any which direction is currently down for these types of moves. We've had the upside liquidity, but what we've also now done is on a daily time frame, we've come from the high, we've created the fractal low, we've had a lower high, and we've also broken the low, creating the change of character. As you can see, we've tried to push up and failed, we've tried to push up and failed, we've tried to push up again, right? And it looks like we're already failing, okay? So with that being said, I now have my bias, I have my low fractal, right? I have reason for down low, reason for down low, reason for down low. And ideally, even this one here hasn't touched. If you look at the low, there, this is 1.12654. And if you look at the low that actually created the gap there, right, on the monthly time frame, this one was the actual one there, which was 1.1263. So there's only 2 pips in that, right? But technically, this is 2 pips lower than this one here, right? So even the monthly gap has not been taken advantage of yet, right? And I wouldn't class 2 pips on a monthly time frame as much of a liquidity grab, right? So bias for me right now is down. I'm carrying the momentum and I'm carrying the same concept. In my notebook, I'm saying, monthly is actually broken a high. We do a pullback. Weekly, we're at the top of the range, do a pullback. Daily, we've already made a fractal low, fractal high, which was a lower high, followed by a lower low, which is a change of character. And I have liquidity to the downside in forms of internal liquidity, no volume through this particular gap, right, and key volume down at 1.1066 type level, right? So I'm using the same bias. Now this is exactly the same concept on every time frame, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to come in and I want to say, okay, I'm going to keep all of those drawings exactly the same. I'm going to probably get rid of my fixed range. I don't need the fixed range there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another piece with these two in. I'm going to put the stream daily, all right? Let me just put that above. If that moves, nope. There we go. Let's see if that goes above. Yeah, nope, still not. I'm going to drag him down below instead. There we go. So now I have, right, a way to, view this and to understand what I've got going on. Now, the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the indicator a second, right? I'm going to hide the indicator. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my bigger bias on. Right? Now, I have this technically as the range because this was the high that broke the prior low, right? And I have obviously my daily range currently sat at this particular level, there to there. So I now know, and again, I can put this on, let's just say I call this a strong, where we got trading panel. Let's give it this. Right, this one here, I'm going to call this my strong, let's do a strong daily high. Right, now I don't need to mark that one up, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this and this into my daily box. Okay, so as you can see, I now have a cluster of drawings. I'm going to turn off the monthly because that one's less interesting to me in terms of where we are right now. I'm going to turn off the weekly because I know my bias is down. Now I have this daily view that I have potential downside targets to aim for, right? And I have the bias based on what's going on now inside of this. Well, we've clearly broken the low, which was the break through that structure level there, which means I can drop down to a 4-hour time frame. And all I'm doing is just following the same logic, right? All the way through. And what I'll do is I'll get you guys this indicator later on, right? I'm still working on it at the moment. So I'll try to do this at some point today. So what I'm looking for now, right, is looking for any kind of change in the sentiment, because when we've made the prior low from that daily low, we've now come up, right? We've come back, we've come down. We then made the extreme high, right? So what you're seeing now is from the daily perspective, we are seeing a simple move, right? That from this area, I'm ignoring all of the noise because we've had a low, a high, a low, right? And we're currently in the process of making what could be a lower high. Right? So again, my bias is still to the downside. Now, for that to become, confirmed and ready to look at trades and trade setups, right? I'm trying to look at this and say to myself, well, what am I actually expecting on this move down? Well, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to see this level obviously breached. But before we get that, I want to see what's happening from this high, right? This was the last real point that we've made any kind of range. So the range here is here to here. Right? So we've dropped down. We failed to take a new low. We've pushed back up and failed to take a new high. We've come down, changing the character. Right? So this now meaning that we are back to a downtrend. And we've come up and technically failed to make a new high. Right? So inside this zone, when I drop down to a smaller time frame now, I'm going to have this view, this view, this view, this here, like that. And ultimately my goal is still down here, right? So at the moment, my overall bias is down, down, and more down. Right? But at the moment, we're also in the process of consolidating. Right? Now, I can go back, I can put the indicator on, I can look for fractal lows, I can look for gaps. But my draw on the bigger time frame is to the downside, right? So I'd like to see shorts from here more than anything else, right? Now I'm on a 4 hour time frame. I'm going to say to myself, right, this is what I'm looking for on that 4 hour time frame. We now have a 4 hour high. So this one here, I'm going to mark this up and I'm going to call this my 4 hour high. Right? Now this technically is going to be a strong high because we've actually, so I'm going to do 4H strong high. Right? Now at this particular point, the reason that it's strong is that we broke the prior low, changing the character to the downside. Now, technically, within that range, this was obviously the low. However, this low is going to be the lower low on the smaller time frame, not to be confused with that 4 hour low that we currently have just there. Now, what I can do is, knowing that we're coming in to the 1 hour time frame next, is we know that that is our low. We know where our 4 hour is. I'm going to make up another little group. I think the group's only going to be one item yet, so this is going to be one item. So I'm just going to make a group anyway, right? And I'm going to put this into, into that group, and I'm going to put the 4 hour, right? And again, you can get kind of creative with this, right? You can actually put in 4 hour stream. Right? So at this particular stage, you've got the 4 hour from the stream. I can turn it off if I want, keep that on, right? I know where my biases are. I know where the daily is. I know where the weekly is. All I'm going to do is keep that on for now. So you can see I've kept my charts clean. I know exactly where I am. I'm walking through the process. I'm kind of building my story. I now have the sequence in terms of what I'm looking for, right? And I can drop down a time frame again. So at this point, I haven't even gone back up a time frame. I've just built the story from the monthly, weekly, daily, 4 hour. Now I'm down on a 1 hour. Right? Now, this is where a lot of you guys will get confused, right? In terms of understanding the difference between these levels, kind of in and out. And forget the 5 minute and the 1 minute, right? And the 15 minute even for now. Just think of this, right? If you understand where that bigger move is going, you're not going to want to take a move on a weekly time frame, right? You're not in that situation yet in terms of taking a trade that's going to last you 6 months. Now, if that is obviously of interest, it doesn't mean that you can't use a 1 minute to get into that weekly time frame move. Right? Now that sounds insane, saying let's use a weekly and a 1 minute to kind of find the right momentum. The reason that I say that that's possible and plausible is that if you understand what we've done now, from a monthly time frame, my bias is down. From a weekly time frame, my weekly bias is down. From a daily time frame, my bias is down. Right? From a 4 hour time frame, we've clearly just changed. So what I'm looking for now is, well, on a 4 hour time frame, we clearly want to see signs of this pushing down. Right? We've definitely changed that character, creating this new low. Well, after creating the new low, right, we've got liquidity that was clearly taken from this kind of region, right? And this is just a rough guide. This doesn't have to be exact. And what we've then done is we've come back into that range, which means the current supply that we have in control right now, right, and this is where the control is going to be quite key, is that on this one time frame, this last buy before you sell, right, is a key area for me in terms of seeing the rejection. We've had the rejection, right, which means we've got technically, let's put these in as well, right? We've got a high, right? We then have a lower high. Oh, too fast on the keyboard there. We then have a lower high. And then ideally, I'm going to copy and paste that. And hopefully, we have a lower high again, right? So, with that being said, we now have a really good understanding in terms of what's going on. We're now breaking these lower highs. We are coming into a situation that the bigger time frames are aligned with the smaller concepts. Now, clearly, after a drop on a smaller time frame, what are we looking for? Well, let's just assume that this drop is done with. for this price to carry on down, we're going to want to see a drop, a rise, and a drop. Right? Now, if we were to assume, again, let's go back to the 2 to the left and 2 to the right kind of conversation, is this low here clear as day? Right? This high here, not really confirmed yet. Next candle will probably confirm it. Right? So we could use a 2 to the left, 2 to the right. And there's nothing stopping us even taking that 2 to the left, 2 to the right on a pullback move. Right? However, if you were to get in on a pullback move, let's just assume that this plays itself out. If you were to get in on a pullback move and you jump there, right? The issue that you have is for that to be confirmed, there's nothing stopping us seeing a candle that comes up like this. Right? Let me make this now brighter just to show you the concept. Just put them in orange for now so you see them clear as day, right? Price comes up into that level. Now, for us to confirm that, right, to take that as a potential entry, if we were to use a fractal entry, right, I only need that one move to create the high, and I'm happy to go short on that given the overall bias. If I was to wait for a 2 to the left and 2 to the right type move, right, let's assume that we have something that does this. Right? And then we go again, right? But the next one does something like this. Right? But what have I done? I've actually missed the setup that I was looking for. Right? So this is where using a fractal high, fractal low in terms of these smaller time frames make it make sense. Right? If I was to view this on a 1 hour time frame and I'm trading a weekly move, even this move isn't really going to bother me, right? Because I know that my weekly draw is down, all the way down here, right? So if I was to see this and I say, oh, well, I've missed that boat, all I would do is wait to get in on the next move, right? That's going to be my 0 to A. I'm going to see a potential pullback B, and then a deeper move C, right? And obviously that move is still only going to be an A of the next time frame up. So this is going to be the A of the 4 hour time frame. So if I go to bed and I miss this in the middle of the night, I can then wait for that pullback, receive that B move potential confirmation, and take that down on a 4 hour time frame. Now that doesn't mean I have to just sit there and watch a 4 hour time frame. What that means is that once I get to an area of interest, right? So just like I did with the gaps at the start, just like I've used the indicator for there to show the up down moves in terms of inside and outside type liquidity, is that when I get into that area of interest, I can then flip all the way back down, going through that 4 hour, 1 hour, 15-minute, 5-minute, viewing the change of character, the break of structures as those moves start to play themselves out, right? Because my bias doesn't change from the bigger time frame, right? And as that clown, one of the videos I sent, that Jeremy Cash guy said, the beauty of this is the day doesn't change until tomorrow, right? Now, the benefit of that is that if you understand and appreciate that you can use that higher time frame bias to use the smaller time frame entries, then all you were doing is flipping through the chart to understand what it is you're looking for. Right? Now, again, notepad and pen, we can say monthly down, weekly down, daily down. Right? 4 hour at the moment is in a downtrend. However, the 1 hour is technically in an uptrend because we've made a high, right? We've made a pullback low. We've broken that structure clear as day, right? And we're now in an area of interest. So what do I want to see on that 1 hour? Well, clearly, I'd like to see a change of character. But just like this particular move, I'm going to miss a lot of the move if I wait for a 1 hour change of character. So what I want to now do is mark up my next couple of bits, right? And you can see me copy in the process, copy, paste, repeat, putting this into a stream 1H. Now, at that particular point, I can close this one away, right? And I can come back to this and I can say, right, look at what I've got on the chart. Can't see anything there right now. I'm going to come back to a 15-minute. And on that 15-minute, I want to put the 1 hour back on, right? Because that's the next one up. And what am I seeing? Well, when I'm looking at this now, I'm saying to myself, forget the range, forget anything else right now. After seeing a drop like this, we've had a high followed by a drop, followed by a newer high. So at the moment, this is my fractal high, right? This fractal high ultimately breaks down. Now, in an ideal world, we see some kind of pullback. That pullback will give me a potential entry to take this short back down to these lows, right? So even if I was looking for a short at some point later on today, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say to myself, right, what have we got? Why is this not grabbing? I'm going to look for a short position, right? That let's assume we come back up to this kind of region. Right? My short in an ideal world is going to be just above these highs, right? And I'm going to be looking for a minimum of this, right? If not, knowing that the bigger time frames are down, right, I can drag this all the way down. Okay, so what you're doing, guys, is you're using the same concepts and same ideas all the way through, over and over and over and over again. And then to answer the to the left, to the right, it depends on the situation, depends on a time frame. Trading on a 1 minute time frame, there's not that much difference in terms of trading on a monthly. But when you're waiting 2 minutes for confirmation versus 2 months, there's the big difference, right? Now, obviously, being able to switch these on, switch these off, right, make them a bit more transparent. There's an answer to one of the other questions. And then ultimately, the last thing is when it comes to confusing yourself in terms of the time frames, notepad and pen probably the best option. As I've mentioned previously, I tend to do bigger time frame, monthly, weekly, daily, 4 hour, 1 hour in that sequence. And all I do is I just pop arrows on the screen so I know where I am. Right now, once I got a general bias, you could even make yourself little notes, and we can say things like this. We can put in a little note on the side, and we can say, the monthly move um, broke a high, right? So pullback. The weekly needs a pullback. Daily chart down, right? 4H now down, right? 1H up, P back in the zone now. 15-minute leg 0 to A, nope, 0 to A, down, P back, ideally holds the supply 1H, right? So all I'm doing is I'm making that type of note. Right? I'm making that type of note to myself, right? I put that into my book, put that obviously on the side, and that gives me a good understanding in terms of where I am now. Again, I've done this relatively fast, but it's relatively slow. I mean, the thing for me, the lagging, once I record these streams, because I don't edit anything, I just record them. I've tried to record them on a decent quality. That slows down the whole processing power on my little laptop, and it slows it down. But for me, this type of analysis is 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Even if you're going down from the monthly all the way down to a 1 minute, it's 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Once you get the general gist of doing this and kind of playing the same things, just go back through the education, go back through cluster zones and the techniques there, and you'll see this kind of over and over and over and over again. And then all I'm doing is I'm just kind of commentating to myself in terms of where we are. Once we break this, where's next and why, right? So anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you on the next stream. Cheers all.